Morning, church.
Good morning.
I gotta say it's a little different from standing up here than it is sitting back there. First, I chose the topics of rest and meditation, and these are things that, like Jesse said, that they kind of spoke to him, and the things that he very much believed in. These are things that I also do mull over a lot, and in some cases, in my spiritual journey, I have found that these are topics that are important. So anyways, getting to rest. So those of us that know, that have studied, right, we call ourselves God's children. We are born from Him. And so in that case, we are like God, right? God's very creative. In fact, He made everything that we exist inside of, right? But we are, in that way, we have the same type of spark. We are creative, we like to work. It was a lot of work to create the world in 7 days, or however long it actually took. We'll debate that later. But it takes a lot of work in order to do that. And even then, He also wants relationships with us. And this is very similar. It's a very human condition to want relationships with each and every person that you come across. So this, we all feel these things on a spiritual level. Something inside of us tells us that these things are true, and it even shows us in the Bible that God also wants these things, and He's been like this from the very beginning. In Genesis 1:26, then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And I'm not really going to read the rest of that because it doesn't pertain to what I'm trying to talk about. But basically, He made us in His image, therefore we are His children. And going from that, He does incredible works. With everyday life, I know that this is something that I tend to forget. I mean, we're working a lot, particularly as active. I'm sure those of you that are retired remember, right? It was some interesting days, longer days, and you tend to kind of forget God sometimes when you're in the middle of it, right? But we do the best we can to try to come back to that. But in any case, it took a lot of work, right, to make everything that we exist and everything that we are a part of. And even then, God rested on the seventh day, right? So, two verses I have for you. So Genesis 2:2. If you want to follow along. I'm so, technology is so great, you can do it instantly. I forget, I'm sorry to stop for a second, but people turn the page if they want to use their actual book. Yes, Genesis 2:2. So on the seventh day, God finished this work that He had done, and He had rested on the seventh day from all the work that He had done. Another verse that, again, ties into this very same thing is Exodus 20:11. Again, pause, give me a second to do that. Exodus 20:11. For 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So, seems kind of disjointed. I get that my notes are kind of all over the place, but I promise it's going to come full circle. So with that, God had an understanding of what we need because we are His children in His likeness, right? So if even God had to rest, then we need rest from time to time. We need sleep. We have to have sleep, right? That's scientifically proven, right? If you go a couple of days without sleeping, you can start to have auditory hallucinations, right? We've studied that. We know that's for a fact, right? So, because your mind needs time to reset, therefore we have to sleep. We have to process all of this information that we've done throughout the day. So, in a similar vein, I think the soul also needs rest too, right? Even though our bodies are indeed temporary, our mind is indeed temporary, along with that, the soul is eternal, and even then, it also needs rest from time to time. And where Jesus, I think, kind of alludes to this as well in the book of Matthew. Matthew 11:28, if you're, again, following along. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And he also, another verse from Matthew is Matt 11:29. So right after that, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And I know yoke is kind of a weird word, right? It's not one that we typically think of, right? You crack it open in an egg, right? But in this context, yoke, the way that it was used for rabbis, is meant that you're taking on the teachings of your rabbi, right? So when he says to take on my yoke, he means to take on what I am teaching you, what I'm telling you. So it's almost, what I have in my notes here is it's like passing the torch, but it's a lot slower. It's a very long process of taking on the yoke, because they're constantly feeding you this information of what they knew of the law for that time, right? But what I think Jesus is getting at here is basically that the world does wear on our souls a lot, especially with some of the crazy things that we've seen lately. So I think that he uses us to do his will and to test us in ways, but the world is also there to test us, and both things require labor on our part spiritually. So the idea is that his teachings do put us at ease, because we know something that is eternal, right? We can kind of put to rest some of these things in the world, at least for a little while, because we know that our souls will carry on after this life, right? And as long as we are doing as Jesus is teaching us, as long as we try to stay pure and do the best we can with the lives that we have, then there is something for us after death. So don't have a great segue from rest into meditation, but give me a second here. So a little while ago, I was transferring from Japan. I was about to go to Bahrain, right? And I was exploring my spirituality a little bit, and with that came this idea of meditation, right? And so I did the very stereotypical thing of, I'm going to sit with my legs crossed and, try to focus on something, right? And what I had come to find out was, at least for the first few days, is I would just end up taking a very long nap. So I got the rest part down, I think. See? Okay, good. All right, so I want to do some defining a little bit. I'm a very analytical person. I like definitions before we go into things. So in English, we're pretty big on semantics too, right? So definitions and semantics are a pretty big thing, right? So that way we can get to the actual meaning of what you're saying, right? Words mean things, right? So I've seen it kind of cycling around on social media too, that some people are trying to say that prayer and meditation are kind of the same thing. And while I do understand that there are similarities, I do want to say that there's very distinct difference. I'm not going to go completely into prayer, because we kind of did that last week, right? So, and I don't want to take up another topic. But I am going to do a quick definition of it. So according to dictionary.com, prayer is defined as a solemn request or help, or expression of thanks to God or an object of worship. So again, now we have that definition as English defines it, right? Now, meditation is defined as the action or practice of meditating, and we break that down to meditate, the root word, which will be to think deeply or focus one's mind for a period of time in silence or with the aid of chanting or for religious or spiritual purposes or as a method of relaxation. So again, even in the English language, we can see that there's quite the divide, right? There's a similar aspect in that you are focused your mind on something, but the way in which that is done is very different. Prayer is more of a conversation with God, whereas meditation is more of like you're focusing inward on yourself and kind of processing information from the day or whatever you've studied or what have you. Now, the Psalms actually in the Old Testament, I've noticed that the meditation does come up actually a few times in the Old Testament, and Psalms particularly the most. I'm only going to do a couple of verses from Psalms. So the first one, if you're following, is Psalms 1 and 2. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits on the seat of scoffers, but in his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. So again, it kind of shows this process of very vigorously studying the Word, and really trying to make it apply to themselves. And that's kind of what we talked about in meditation, right? Is focusing on something that we have gone over, or processing information, as we've said before. Psalm 119:27 is another verse in which has the word meditate in it, and it says, "Make me understand the way of your precepts, and I will meditate on your wondrous works." So again, we're talking about focusing on what the word is actually saying. But in researching this topic, a thought crossed my mind, and I was like, well, if we're going off of definitions, maybe we should look at the original Hebrew word for meditate, right? And it turns out there are 7. I'm only going to go over a couple this morning. But yeah, there's a lot of different words that mean meditation as we define it in English. So the second most common word is Haggah, right? And roughly that translates to what we typically know as to imagine or to meditate. But it also talks of speaking or muttering or musing, right? So it's not just internal in that sense. And the way that Psalms 1 verse 2 uses it is this Haggah form of meditate. So this person is not just, maybe they're not just imagining it, and they're not just trying to mull it over, maybe they're speaking of it as well. And a more interesting one is the one that's in 119:27, Psalm 119:27. That one is the word sayach, right? And that one has a somewhat similar definition, right? But it also includes a definition of singing, right? So there's this idea that maybe meditation isn't just what's internal, it's not just inside, it's a whole mindset, right? It's a whole being of taking what you are studying. In our case, it would be God's word and God's law, and looking at that in a way that we are converting it into something inward or outward, right? Even our singing this morning could, by this definition of sayach, could be meditation of sorts, because you're in the mindset of worshiping God, right? And even in the book of Job, it talks about this a little bit. Job 15 verse 4, if you want to turn there. In this particular, to give some context for this one, is at this point Job is being tested by God, right? And he is trying to figure out why all these things are happening to him, and his friends come to him, but they're not really helping him. They're kind of like chastising him. You know, they're like, "Well, you had to have done something." You know, like so. And in particular, that verse 15:4, he says that he says, "But you are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before God." So, in a way, I believe you pronounce it Eliphaz. I'm not entirely sure, but Eliphaz is chastising him, saying that basically, like, even the way that your mindset of God is disrespectful. That has to be a reason why, you know. To me, this shows that even in those times, they had a context that, because again, this uses the particular verb sayach. It shows to me that there is that they had a concept of both inward and outward forms of meditation in this aspect. That somehow his way of his mindset was totally disrespectful to God. So, in my conclusion for this, I'll say that, right, kind of going back to the beginning, that the meditation is not the stereotypical, like, Tibetan monk saying Om, right, and focusing on what's inside of yourself, but it is both it's a mindset of inward and outward expression. You can look inward and find God there, but you can also project outward in this form. And I hope that shed some light on my perspective on that this morning. Thank you.